The silence in the grand chamber of the Doge's palace was not one of peace, but of a tightly coiled serpent waiting to strike. Only the rhythmic, brassy groan of the massive clock in the hall broke the tension. 16-year-old Isabella Contarini stood perfectly still, her spine a rod of iron beneath the heavy, borrowed velvet of her disguise. She was no longer Isabella. She was now Marco, the Contarini heir. Her father, the great merchant Alvise Contarini, lay in a fever-induced delirium across the lagoon. But it wasn't his illness that had brought her here. Before the Council of Ten, the most feared and secretive body in all of Venice, it was the promissory note clutched in her hand. A note that proved a rival merchant, the venomous Ser Niccolo Barozzi, had forged Contarini's seal. Niccolo himself sat across the table, his eyes hooded and smug, like a shark that had tasted blood. He spoke with the oiled cadence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Young Marco," Barozzi sneered, his gaze sweeping over the boy's slender frame. "Your grief for your father is understandable, but surely you realize this document is a forgery. The Contarini house is bankrupt, its assets forfeit. I only offer this generous settlement out of respect for your family's legacy." Marco, Isabella, felt the blood rush to her ears. The truth was burning on her tongue, but she knew one wrong word would mean ruin. If they discovered the fraud, they would seize their ships. If they discovered her identity, she would be married off instantly. The Contarini trading empire, built brick by brick over a century, would be handed over to a stranger, and her father's legacy destroyed. She met Niccolo's gaze, her own eyes, deep, dark pools beneath the strategically thick brow, unflinching. She took a breath, allowing the practiced lower register of her voice to fill the imposing room. "You speak of respect, Ser Barozzi. I speak of larceny, and I suggest you look closer at the grain of the seal's impression, because the man who forged this did not know my father's thumb twitches when he presses the wax. He always presses the left side harder than the right." She slammed the note onto the heavy mahogany table. "The signature is perfect," she challenged, her voice rising now, echoing off the gilded walls. "And my father's empire," she finished, leaning in, her eyes narrowed with pure Contarini fire, "is not for sale." The council members stirred. Niccolo Barozzi's smugness faltered, replaced by a sudden, dangerous flicker of surprise. The game had begun. Chapter 1. The Weight of Velvet and Linen. The year is 1488. The air in Venice, even on the mildest autumn morning, is thick with the scent of salt water, spice, and ambition. Isabella Contarini, now Marco Contarini, lived in a gilded prison. The moment her father, Alvise, collapsed during a high-stakes negotiation with a Florentine banker, Isabella's life ended and Marco's began. The physician had been brutally honest. "He will recover, God willing, but it will be months. 6 months of stillness." 6 months the house of Contarini did not have. A merchant house, unlike a noble one, was a living, breathing entity that required constant, ruthless management. If the Contarini fleet, 23 great ships sailing the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Atlantic, was left untended, the empire would simply dissolve. Debts would be called in, rivals would seize opportunities, and the family name would be ruined. Isabella knew the books better than any clerk in the Fondaco. She had been her father's secret shadow for years, privy to every ledger, every shipment, every political maneuver. But a donna simply could not run a trading empire. not in Venice, not when the Council of Ten was always seeking reasons to consolidate power. Her father's voice, raspy from his sickbed, had been her instruction. The robes, Isabella, the finest linen, my cane, the hair, you must bind it tight. And Marco, you must never, ever allow them to see fear. It had taken weeks to perfect the masquerade. The heavy, dark velvet robe her father always wore, tailored to fit her slighter frame, helped disguise her shape. A meticulously wound linen bandeau crushed her long dark hair to her skull, hidden beneath a velvet cap. Most difficult was her voice, practiced in the empty back channels of the palace until it was a convincingly low drone. Her first act as Marco was to dismiss their most loyal but perhaps most talkative servant, Lucia, and replace him with a deaf-mute boy from Murano. The secret was locked within the walls of their palazzo, shared only by her father's weakened heart and her own beating one. This morning, Marco was due at the Rialto Exchange, the frenzied heart of Venetian commerce. He stood before the mirror, assessing his disguise one last time. The high collar concealed the delicate curve of his neck. The heavy signet ring on his index finger felt like a lead weight, and the slightly clumsy stride he had adopted, mimicking a man's confidence, felt unnatural. "You look well, figlio," her father rasped from the silk-curtained four-poster bed. "I look like a fraud," Marco muttered, checking the tightness of the binding. "No," Alvise coughed, a terrible, dry sound. "You look like a contarini. Remember the rule of the market. Never let a man know how badly you need to sell or how deeply you need to buy." Marco nodded, pulling the velvet cap low. Stepping out on the calle, the narrow streets, the difference was immediate. As Isabella, men would eye her, perhaps flirt, but ultimately dismiss her. As Marco, men met his gaze, measured him, and moved aside. He was now a factor, a variable in their endless equation of profit and loss. He navigated the confusion of bridges and narrow walkways to the exchange. The noise was a tidal wave, shouts of prices, the clatter of coins, the hurried signing of papers. His target was a spice broker named Filippo. Contarini had 2 ships due from Alexandria, one carrying pepper, the other saffron. They needed to sell the pepper quickly to cover the Barozzi-related shortfall, but the saffron was their golden ticket. Marco found Filippo huddled with a group of Levantine merchants. He approached, placing his hand casually on the pommel of the dagger at his waist, a necessary prop of Venetian manhood.
Filippo, a stout man with a perpetually sweaty brow, turned, his eyes sizing up the young man who now held the reins of the Contarini fortune. "Marco, a pleasure. I hear your father is indisposed. A shame. I hope he recovers quickly. As for the pepper, it is a glut market, young Contarini. I can give you 90 ducats per bag, and that, I assure you, is charity." Marco felt his heart drop. 90 ducats. His father had budgeted for at least 110. Niccolo Barozzi was clearly flooding the market to destroy them. "Charity," Marco repeated, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "It must be the fever affecting your judgment, Ser Filippo. 90 ducats is the price of dried mud, not Malabar pepper." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping, forcing Filippo to strain to hear. "I will not sell the pepper today. I hear the fleet of the Barozzi is delayed by rough seas off the Cyclades. When their lesser quality pepper hits the market in a week, yours will be worthless. So I will simply hold mine. I will hold it and wait. You will, however, be needing saffron for the wedding season, will you not? I have 20 crates of the finest quality arriving next week." Marco paused, watching the greedy flicker in Filippo's eyes. "Saffron is not a glut commodity. I can offer you the exclusive right to sell my saffron, for a percentage, of course, say 15%. The condition? You must guarantee me 110 ducats per bag for the pepper today, and you must buy 200 bags. Filippo stared at the young merchant, his calculation clear. The saffron commission was worth a fortune. He couldn't afford to let it go. 110, he wheezed. And the saffron is mine to broker? It is, Marco confirmed, extending his hand, the signet ring cold against his palm. A handshake on the Rialto, Ser Filippo. Let the contract be drawn. As they shook hands, Marco felt a rush, not of fear, but of exhilarating triumph. He had not only secured the required funds, but he had also outmaneuvered a seasoned broker on his very first day. The heavy velvet and linen suddenly felt less like a costume and more like a suit of armor. But as he turned to leave, his triumph was immediately challenged. Standing a few paces away, framed by the chaos of the market, was Sir Niccolo Barozzi. Niccolo gave him a slow, chilling smile, his voice too soft for the noise, yet piercingly audible. "A clever maneuver, Marco," he purred, "but an amateur one. You've put all your faith in a single spice, and as we both know, in Venice, one bad wind can sink 1,000 fortunes." He didn't wait for a reply, but walked away, leaving Marco to wonder. How had he known about the saffron? The intelligence Barozzi possessed was too specific. Marco Contarini's fight to save his family was not just against the market, it was against a powerful enemy who had spies everywhere, perhaps even inside the Contarini Palazzo itself. The Contarini Palazzo felt different now. The opulent rooms, once comforting, now seemed to hide secrets behind every tapestry and within every shadow. The knowledge that Niccolo Barozzi knew about the saffron, information known only to Marco and her feverish father, was a poison seeping through the stone foundation. Marco, Isabella, rushed past the main receiving room, where the elaborate Contarini coat of arms, a winged lion clutching a trident, was carved into the mantelpiece. She needed two things, to check on her father and to begin the hunt for the traitor. Alvise Contarini was sleeping, his breath shallow. His personal valet, Silas, a quiet middle-aged man who had served the family for 20 years, sat patiently beside him. Silas was the only other person in the house besides the deaf-mute boy, who saw Marco transform back into Isabella each night. "The Rialto went well, signore," Silas asked softly, using the formal address, even in the palazzo's inner sanctum. "Too well, Silas," Marco replied, stripping off the oppressive velvet robe. "Barozzi was waiting for me. He knew about the saffron. Only 3 people knew about that shipment, my father, myself, and perhaps the captain, but the captain is in Alexandria." Silas's face, usually placid, creased with concern. "A spy then, signore, and not one who could overhear chatter in the marketplace. Someone reading the ledgers." Marco paced the room, the heavy signet ring finally coming off her finger. "But who? The clerks at the Fondaco only see the manifest after the deal is struck, and I have kept the shipping schedules locked away." She paused, considering the household. "The deaf boy?" "Impossible," Silas said quickly. "He works only in the scullery, and cannot read a word of Latin, not even the Contarini cipher." "Then it must be the ledger room," Marco concluded, her eyes narrowing. "The old room downstairs, the one my father has kept locked for years, where the true, private balance sheets are kept." The Contarini cipher. That evening, Isabella dismissed Silas and told him to guard the main floor. Dressed in a simple woolen gown, carrying a single oil lamp, she crept down to the palazzo's basement level. The air was cold and damp, smelling of old parchment and mildew. The ledger room was secured by a heavy wooden door and a large iron lock. But Isabella knew the trick. Her father had always preferred complexity over strength. The lock was opened not by a key, but by pressing 3 small, nearly invisible studs on the plate in the correct sequence, a simple cipher her father had taught her on her 12th birthday. Click, click, click. The door groaned open. Inside, the room was small, lined floor to ceiling with wooden shelves holding hundreds of leather-bound books. These were the true secrets of the Contarini wealth, not just the profits, but the political debts, the bribes paid to customs officers, and the delicate alliances that kept the ships sailing smoothly through volatile trade routes.
"A woman," Isabella whispered, the truth hitting her like a slap. "Barozzi isn't spying on the books, he's spying on the household." She flipped through the ledger. The section detailing the Alexandria Manifest was perfectly clean. The spy had not written anything down. They had simply read it and passed the information. She quickly replaced the ledger and locked the door, the small pedal clutched in her hand. The spy was not a clerk. The spy was someone with access to her father's private spaces. The only person who had such access, besides herself and Silas, was Contessa Giulia Trevisan, the woman who managed the household accounts and had recently been a frequent, well-meaning visitor to check on the ailing Contarini. The Contessa was a close friend of Isabella's late mother, a pillar of Venetian society, but also rumored to have serious gambling debts accrued by her shiftless son. The violet petal was her only piece of evidence, and it pointed directly to a trusted family friend. The looming intercept. The immediate threat, however, was not the spy, but the saffron shipment. Barozzi's veiled threat on the Rialto was clear. One bad wind can sink 1,000 fortunes. Niccolo Barozzi wouldn't simply wait for the saffron to arrive. He would attempt to intercept the ship, perhaps bribe the customs agents in Corfu, or worse, hire pirates. Marco returned upstairs, his mind racing. He needed a countermove, and he needed it before the Contarini serpent sailed through the Strait of Otranto. He went back to his father, who was awake now, watching him with tired, knowing eyes. "Barozzi's ship, the Golden Lion," Alvise whispered, his voice hardly audible. "It's due to take on a load of silk in Cyprus. It sails through the Ionian Sea, past Corfu, next week." "And the serpent?" Marco asked, referring to their saffron ship. 3 days behind Barozzi. Perfect bait." Marco understood the implication. Barozzi would be looking for the serpent. Marco had to ensure that the serpent arrived not empty-handed, but empty of the saffron. "We need a decoy," Marco stated, the plan forming rapidly. A small galley sailing through the strait, displaying the Contarini colors, but carrying only common salt or ballast, and the serpent must change its course entirely. Alvise smiled weakly, a spark of the old merchant's fire in his eyes. "You think like a true Contarini, but who can command a vessel under the Barozzi shadow? Who is fast enough and bold enough to lead the serpent on a new, uncharted course?" "There is one," Marco said, walking to the window that overlooked the Grand Canal. "Captain Riccardo, the only man in Venice who hates Barozzi more than we do, and he's faster than any of Barozzi's clumsy galleons." But getting the orders to Captain Riccardo and the Contarini serpent required a risky night journey to the harbor, and it risked exposing Marco's fragile authority to the public, or worse, to the spies still lurking within the palazzo.
The Contessa stared at the wallet, then back at Marco, her eyes wide. "You want me to lie to him? To send him on a second wild goose chase?" "Yes," Marco confirmed, standing up, towering over her with the authority of the Contarini name. "And when you have delivered that letter,
You will leave Venice for the mainland by the end of the day. If you or your son ever speak the name Contarini or Barozzi again, I will release this evidence and the ledger to the Council of 10 myself. Do you understand, Contessa?" I understand, Marco," she whispered, snatching the wallet and the pedal. Marco left the villa, the chill in his heart slowly beginning to thaw. The first spy was neutralized, the saffron decoy set. But the game was far from over. Niccolo Barozzi would soon realize his intelligence was false, and his fury would be monumental. The Contarini Palazzo had settled into a strained quiet. The removal of Contessa Trevisan had restored temporary security, but Marco felt the air vibrating with the inevitable storm from the Barozzi house. Niccolo Barozzi was not a man to accept being outsmarted, especially not by a 16-year-old upstart. Marco spent the following days poring over ledgers, calculating the exact moment the saffron would arrive via the Dalmatian route. The money from the pepper sale was secured, but the saffron represented a massive surge of capital, enough to pay off all immediate debts and weather any economic reprisal Barozzi might launch. A new rival appears. The relative calm was shattered by an unexpected intrusion at the Rialto. Marco was negotiating the exchange rate for Turkish gold Altyn when a vibrant, almost aggressively charming young man with impeccably tailored silks and the sharp, hawkish features of a Florentine banker approached him. This was Lorenzo Visconti, heir to one of Florence's most formidable banking families and a significant new player in Venice trade. "Marco Contarini," Lorenzo announced, with a dazzling, if slightly arrogant, smile. "You are more legend than man these days. I heard the gossip about the pepper deal. It took courage, or perhaps pure ignorance, to challenge Ser Filippo so directly." "It was commerce, Ser Visconti, not courage," Marco replied dryly, maintaining a professional distance. "A simple matter of supply and demand." "I disagree. It was a beautiful gamble. My name is Lorenzo Visconti. I intend to make Venice my new base of operations, and I require a partner. Someone with ships, local knowledge, and fire." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I have capital. You have the sea lanes. We could make an empire." Marco's mind spun. A partnership with Visconti would provide the Contarini house with an immediate massive infusion of Florentine funds, stabilizing them beyond Barozzi's reach. But it would also introduce an extremely smart, highly observant man directly into their business, putting the secret of Marco's true identity under immense scrutiny. "The Contarini house does not require partners," said Visconti, Marco stated coolly. "We stand alone." "Every man needs an ally in Venice, Marco, especially when one is under the surveillance of the Lion of San Marco." He gave a meaningful glance toward a dark corner of the exchange where a known Barozzi associate lingered. "Think on it. I shall be at your heels until you agree." As Lorenzo walked away, Marco felt a profound unease. Barozzi was a known shark, but Visconti was a glittering, unpredictable danger. Barozzi wanted to destroy Contarini. Visconti wanted to possess it. The Barozzi trap springs. 2 days later, the trap Barozzi had set for the serpent was confirmed. Captain Riccardo's messenger, disguised as a common fisherman, arrived at the palazzo under the cover of a dense morning fog. He reported that Barozzi's fastest galley, the Vengeance, had sailed past Corfu, precisely where the decoy barge was meant to be. "They seized the decoy, signor," the fisherman whispered to Marco in the ledger room. "Barozzi's men boarded it swiftly. When they found nothing but water ballast and a handful of salt, their fury was impressive." The messenger also brought the news Marco feared most. Barozzi knew the Contessa had betrayed him.
She was seen leaving Venice this morning, but not before 2 of Barozzi's thugs paid a visit to her villa. They didn't find her, but they left a message. A dead canary left on her pillow, its neck snapped. Barozzi was sending a clear signal. Retaliation was coming, swift and brutal. "What is his next move?" Marco demanded. "Barozzi's agents are now scouring the Adriatic, looking for any vessel matching the Serpent's size, heading for Ancona, the route the Contessa fed him. But they are slow, signor. The Serpent is already past Zadar." Marco drew a shaky breath of relief. The plan had worked. The saffron was safe, for now, hidden in the labyrinthine channels of Dalmatia. But Barozzi would not keep searching the Adriatic for long. He would soon realize the saffron's true destination, Venice. The only way to stop a vessel that had successfully evaded the open sea was to prevent it from docking. Marco went immediately to his father. Alvise Cantorini was weak but lucid. "Barozzi will pay the port authority," he stated, his eyes closed. "It's the only move left. He will bribe the Doge's men at the customs house to declare the Serpent's manifest fraudulent, saying the saffron is spoiled or counterfeit. They won't seize it, they will condemn it, and we will lose everything." Marco gripped his father's hand. "We have to beat him to the bribe. We need to secure an official document from the Doge, guaranteeing the Serpent unimpeded entry, based on a prior agreement." "That document," Alvise rasped, his eyes fluttering open, "is sealed in my bank vault. But that is not enough. You must also appeal to the one man Barozzi fears, Ser Ludovico Foscari." Ser Foscari was an elder senator, a quiet but powerful force on the Council of Ten, known for his unyielding integrity and distaste for Barozzi's corruption. "He owes the Contarini a favor," Alvise said, "a private debt of honor from 20 years ago. You must remind him of it personally." The idea of confronting a high-ranking, incorruptible senator with a story of a long-ago favor, and all while maintaining the charade of Marco, was terrifying. The scrutiny would be intense, but it was the only way to secure protection against Barozzi's customs house bribe. Marco stood straight, the weight of the Cantorini trident resting firmly on her shoulders. "I will go. But first, the bank. I need the old document, father." The next morning, Marco would be forced to navigate the highest levels of Venetian society, a private audience with the prestigious Senator Foscari and the constant unwanted attention of the charming Florentine predator, Lorenzo Visconti. The morning was crisp, the light reflecting harshly off the marble facades of the Grand Canal. Marco, dressed in a new, austere black velvet suit, felt every eye on him. Today's mission was twofold: retrieve the key document from the bank vault and secure the protection of Senator Foscari. The intercept at the bank. The Contarini vault was beneath the ancient fortified bank of the Todesco brothers, near the Rialto Bridge. After a brief, nerve-wracking descent into the stone-cold depths, Marco presented the necessary documentation. The bank manager unlocked a small iron-banded chest. Inside, beneath a layer of dust, was a roll of parchment bearing the heavy gold seal of the Doge, an agreement dated 10 years prior, granting Alvise Contarini expedited and unquestioned passage for any non-contraband shipments for a period of 20 years, in thanks for financing a crucial military campaign. The document was solid, but Marco knew that in Venice, today's bribe often outweighed yesterday's contract. The senator's protection was still essential. Emerging from the bank, clutching the parchment tube tightly, Marco was immediately confronted by the last person he wanted to see. "Marco, my friend," Lorenzo Visconti called out, leaning elegantly against the bank's columns. His Florentine silks seemed to blow even in the Venetian light. "A man of your means shouldn't travel alone. I have my private gondola waiting. I insist we share the trip to the Doge's district." Marco stiffened. A forced, intimate interaction with the hyper-observant Visconti was the worst possible timing. "That's generous, Sir Visconti, but I have pressing business." "And I have nothing but time," Lorenzo countered, smoothly taking Marco's elbow, a possessive, friendly gesture that forced Marco into a closer, more challenging stance. "Perhaps we can discuss the Venice-Alexandria route. Your father ran it like a master. Perhaps you will need a Florentine advisor to maintain that legacy." Marco had no choice but to enter the private gondola. He sat rigidly, careful to use broad, angular gestures when speaking. As the gondola glided down the canal, Lorenzo spoke of trade and capital, all the while watching Marco with unnerving intensity. "You are very particular about how you hold that parchment, Marco. Does it contain the very heart of the Contarini fortune?" "It contains proof that the Contarini fortune is well secured," Marco replied, trying to sound bored. Then the gondola hit a small wake. Marco, unprepared, instinctively stabilized himself by grabbing the edge of the seat. A small, quick movement that was distinctly feminine in its grace and lightness of touch. Lorenzo's eyes darted to Marco's hand, then to his face. The smile didn't fade, but a momentary assessing glint appeared in his gaze. "You are very light-handed, Marco," Lorenzo commented, the words innocent, yet loaded with suspicion. "Does the burden of your father's business not weigh on you?" "I am trained for precision, Ser Visconti," Marco snapped back, instantly dropping his voice an octave. "Precision saves ducats. Now, if you'll excuse me, this is my stop." Marco leaped out, leaving Lorenzo on the gondola, his thoughtful, calculating gaze burning into Marco's back. The brief lapse had been noted. The senator's debt. Marco arrived at Senator Lodovico Foscari's palazzo, a formidable structure designed to repel invasion and scrutiny. He was admitted into a sparse, severe study. Senator Foscari was a tall, stoic man with the chilling authority of one who rarely had to raise his voice. He sat behind a massive desk, studying Marco with an expressionless gaze. "Young Contarini," the senator acknowledged, "it is a grave shame about your father. I assume this visit concerns Niccolo Barozzi." "It does, Senator," Marco confirmed, standing straight and tall. "Barozzi planned to use bribery at the customs house to condemn the Contarini serpent shipment upon arrival, effectively destroying my father's house." Marco placed the Doge's contract on the desk. "This document guarantees us unimpeded passage, but only your authority, Senator, can ensure the customs officials honor it when Barozzi's gold arrives." Foscari didn't touch the document. He steepled his fingers, staring into the middle distance. "Alvise Contarini aided me many years ago. I remember my debts. You are here to call in that favor." "I am," Marco said simply. The senator nodded slowly. "I will speak to the customs director. Barozzi's gold will be refused. The serpent will dock without incident. The saffron will be verified and delivered." A profound wave of relief washed over Marco. The most dangerous hurdle was cleared. "Thank you, Senator. The Contarini house is forever in your debt." "Wait," Foscari said, raising a hand. "I said I remember my debts, but debts must be paid, not merely transferred. The protection you seek has a price." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. "Name it, Senator." "My daughter Elena is of marriageable age. She is an intelligent girl, but perhaps too headstrong for her own good. She requires a partner with a strong name and a disciplined mind. The senator's eyes finally met Marco's, unyielding. The price for my intervention is the promise of your hand, Marco. You will marry my daughter, Elena Foscari, within the year. The Contarini name will be secured, and my daughter will receive the protection of a respected house. Marco felt the blood drain from his face. Marriage. The ultimate, absolute end of the masquerade. He couldn't marry Elena Foscari. He was Isabella. Senator, Marco stammered, scrambling for an excuse. My father, his health, I cannot make such a promise without his consent. Your father is indisposed, Foscari stated flatly. You are the head of the house. You have just called in the Contarini's most valuable favor to save your fortune. That fortune now belongs to you, and this is the payment. A Contarini-Foscari union. It is good for Venice. It is good for your house. Foscari tapped the desk, his voice a low, immutable command. Accept the terms or walk away, Marco, and let Barozzi sink your ships. Marco was trapped. He could save his father's empire, but lose his entire identity, bound forever to a lie and a bride he could never claim. He swallowed hard, seeing no other path. I accept your terms, Senator, Marco said, the words tasting like ash.
Marco returned to the Contarini Palazzo in a daze. He had saved the fortune, but signed a death warrant for Isabella. The promise to marry Elena Foscari within the year was an iron shackle, closing the window of time for his father's recovery and his return to his true self. Silas met him at the door, his face alight with concern. You look pale, signore. Did the senator refuse? No, Silas. The senator agreed, Marco replied, walking heavily toward the stairs. The serpent is safe, but the price was higher than any spice. I am to marry his daughter, Elena Foscari, within the year. Silas froze, the relief draining instantly from his face. Marry? A marriage contract is irreversible, signore. What will we do? Marco looked up at his father's closed door. We will pray that father recovers quickly, and until then, we play the game. I cannot break this promise without condemning the entire house, and I cannot risk meeting his daughter yet. I need to focus on Barozzi. He will not accept defeat quietly. The arrival. The following morning, Venice was awash with chatter. The news of the failed Barozzi intercept was spreading, and the successful docking of the Contarini Serpent was a spectacular public victory for the Contarini house. Marco stood at the window of the Palazzo's library, watching the news unfold. He had received a secret missive from Captain Riccardo. The saffron was offloaded, inspected, and verified, clean of all defects, thanks to Senator Foscari's discreet intervention. The Contarini coffers were suddenly flush with the gold from the swift sale of the highly prized spice. The immediate threat was gone. But Marco's triumph was short-lived. A heavy knock echoed on the palazzo door. Silas brought in a scroll sealed with the Doge's official wax, the winged lion. It was a summons from the Council of 10. It is not good, signore. They demand your immediate presence. Silas whispered, his face tight with fear. Marco broke the seal. The charge was chillingly formal. Treason by usurpation. The scroll alleged that Marco Contarini, due to his father's incapacitation, had unlawfully assumed the mantle of the family business without proper submission to the council for oversight. The punishment for usurpation of authority and deception of the highest governing body was severe: exile and confiscation of all assets. Barozzi, Marco hissed, crushing the parchment in his fist.
He couldn't beat the saffron, so he's attacking the legitimacy of the merchant. He knows I'm too young and technically without the full consent of my father to wield this power. This was the deadliest blow yet. It didn't matter if Marco had saved the house. If the council declared his actions illegitimate, the contracts, including the pepper sale and the Foscari betrothal, could be nullified, and Barozzi would move to seize the entire Contarini fortune. Marco had to face the Council of Ten again, but this time he was not just defending a forged seal, he was defending his very existence as Marco. The confrontation and the compromise. Marco returned to the Doge's palace, the cold dread replaced by a hardening resolve. Niccolo Barozzi was waiting. He sat at the council table, not as an accused, but as the accuser, a position of immense power. His eyes were cold chips of ice. "Young Marco," Barozzi greeted, his voice dripping with false pity. "I pleaded with the council to allow your father to appoint an official steward, but the law is absolute. Your unsupervised transactions are a scandal. The Contarini house must be placed under state administration immediately." Marco stepped forward, laying the retrieved Doge's contract flat on the table. "I have deceived no one, Sir Barozzi, and I have usurped nothing," Marco stated, his voice ringing with confidence. "The council charged my father with maintaining the Contarini ships in the Mediterranean. My actions over the last few weeks, securing the pepper deal, retrieving the saffron, have only ensured the strength of the Venetian fleet." He pointed to the seal on the contract. "My authority is implicit under my father's mandate. Furthermore," Marco continued, playing his newest, most vital card, "I have secured a formal alliance with Senator Lodovico Foscari, which is far more beneficial to Venice than the gossip you peddle." The council members stirred again. The name Foscari carried enormous weight. Barozzi blanched. "A marriage contract. The boy has made an arrangement during a time of crisis. It is desperation, not strategy." "It is security, Sir Barozzi," Marco countered, meeting his gaze. "The Foscari family is now invested in the prosperity of the Contarini house. Should the Contarini fortune fall, the senator will suffer a profound loss of face." The council members exchanged calculating glances. The alliance with Foscari was indeed politically invaluable. Barozzi's charge suddenly looked like a jealous internal squabble rather than a matter of state security. The Doge, a weary old man named Malpiero, cleared his throat. "The charge of usurpation is serious, Sir Barozzi, but young Marco's actions have demonstrably benefited the Republic. We will not order exile or confiscation." Barozzi looked defeated, but the Doge continued, offering a compromise that satisfied the law and Barozzi's hunger for oversight. However, to ensure full legality, the Contarini house must operate under direct council supervision until Alvise Contarini is well enough to resume his duties. The council will appoint a supervisor to approve all transactions. The Doge looked directly at Barozzi. "Ser Niccolò Barozzi, you will be appointed the supervisor of the Contarini house, effective immediately."
Barozzi's cold smile returned. A public defeat had become a private victory. He could not confiscate the assets, but he would now control every ducat Marco spent, every ship Marco dispatched. He was now officially inside the Contarini house. "I accept my duty, Your Grace," Barozzi purred. The fiancé. Marco returned home, the victory over the saffron entirely eclipsed by the shadow of Barozzi's supervision and the reality of the betrothal. He had won the war, but lost the battle for privacy. The very next day, a note arrived from Senator Foscari. His daughter, Elena, wished to meet her betrothed. Marco steeled himself, forcing down the panic.
He was not just facing an enemy now, but a future. He was shown into the Foscari Gardens, finding a young woman reading near a fountain. Elena Foscari was stunning, with a fiery cascade of red hair and intelligent, deeply green eyes. She was certainly not the headstrong woman her father had described. She radiated fierce competence. Marco approached, offering a deep, formal bow. "Lady Elena, I am Marco Contarini." Elena looked up, closing her book with a decisive snap. She scrutinized Marco from head to toe, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. "Marco Contarini," she repeated, her voice strong and melodic. "The man who saved his father's house by trading his freedom. You have spirit, I shall give you that. But know this, Marco, I have no interest in love or children or domestic life." She stood up, meeting his height with an equal measure of presence. "My father promised me a husband who would allow me to run the Foscari banking interests in an age when I cannot hold the title myself. You need the Foscari name to keep Barozzi at bay. I need the Contarini name for legitimacy." She extended her hand, not for a kiss, but for a handshake, a gesture almost unheard of for a Venetian noblewoman. "This is a business agreement, Marco. You will maintain the ships and the illusion of command. I will quietly handle the ledgers and the capital. We will be partners, but I expect discretion, professionalism, and absolute fidelity. Do we understand each other, husband?" Marco shook her hand, an odd sense of relief mixing with the crushing guilt of the deception. Elena Foscari was brilliant, ruthless, and entirely focused on commerce, not affection. This was a reprieve, but it meant Isabella was now bound in a partnership with a woman who was possibly just as clever and certainly more dangerous than Barozzi himself. The next few days were a tense, exhausting dance for Marco. He now had two masters, both demanding access to the heart of the Contarini operations, and both operating with conflicting goals. Nicola Barozzi, the newly appointed supervisor, arrived at the Contarini Fondaco, warehouse and business office, every morning with the punctuality of a tax collector. He was polite, professional, and utterly venomous. Elena Foscari, the fiancée and business partner, began sending daily notes, requesting meetings to review the Contarini strategic objectives and examine the long-term capital projections. Marco had to manage both, all while his father lay sick and the core secret of his identity remained locked away. Barozzi's prying eyes. Barozzi's first act was to demand the most sensitive information: the names of the Contarini creditors, and the full inventory of the saffron sale profits. Marco presented Barozzi with the official, public-facing ledger, the one that revealed profitable shipments and general expenses. Barozzi flipped through the pages with disdain. "This is a record for the customs house, Marco. I require the ledger that shows the true flow of ready capital. Where is your money invested? Which banks hold your gold?" "All Contarini gold is held by the Tedesco brothers," Marco replied smoothly, a half-truth. He had moved the saffron profits to a separate private account, known only to himself and Silas. "And the creditors," Barozzi pressed, tapping the list. "This list of debts is surprisingly short. Where are the private lenders, those men who demand usurious interest?" Marco knew Barozzi was looking for the names of the Contarini's long-term political allies and smaller, discreet lenders, the people who would turn on the family instantly if Barozzi promised them a higher return. "The Contarini house pays its bills promptly, Sir Barozzi," Marco stated firmly. "We have no need for loan sharks or private lenders. Unlike perhaps certain houses who spend fortunes on luxury and forget their obligations. Marco had aimed the jab perfectly. Barozzi's face tightened. He was a ruthless merchant, but also a notorious social climber, who spent wildly to impress the nobility. "Watch your tongue, boy," Barozzi warned, his voice low and dangerous. "I have the authority here. You will show me your private correspondence with your captains, now." Marco handed over a sheaf of carefully curated, innocuous letters, discussions about sail repair and crew wages, all written by Silas and signed by Marco. He refused to show the real coded messages that guided the fleet. Barozzi left frustrated, but Marco knew the attack would continue. Barozzi wasn't interested in accounting. He was interested in finding a legal flaw or a vulnerable ally he could bribe. The demanding partner. That evening, Marco received a sharply worded note from Elena. "Your delay is unacceptable. We have an agreement. I expect you at the Foscari Palazzo at 8 bells tomorrow morning. Bring the real ledger." Marco anticipated this. Elena Foscari was astute. She knew the public ledger was worthless. She needed to understand the true financial health of her future house. The next morning, Marco arrived at the Foscari Palazzo, this time bearing the real red calfskin ledger, Volume 5, from the hidden room. However, he had spent the night meticulously translating the most sensitive political and private entries into a complex personal cipher only he could read, leaving only the raw, generalized financial data in clear Latin. Elena Foscari was waiting in her private study, a room dominated by scrolls and charts, not tapestries. "You are late, Marco," she greeted him without preamble. "Let us dispense with the niceties. I need to know where the weaknesses lie. Show me the Contarini's most perilous bets and its riskiest investments." Marco placed the ledger on her desk, carefully opened to a page showing a high volume of transactions. Volume 5. It contains the true picture. But please understand, Elena, this is a document of the highest secrecy. Elena's long, elegant fingers traced the copperplate script. She quickly absorbed the numbers, her expression impressed. "The liquidity is excellent. The saffron sale was masterful. However," she paused, tapping a specific entry, "this transferred to the Banca di Firenze 4 years ago. It's categorized as military contribution, but the sum is immense. What was the real purpose of this transfer?" Marco felt a cold prickle of alarm. The Florentine transfer was the payment his father had made to settle the debt of Senator Foscari, the favor that had secured Marco's help. It was the deepest, darkest secret in the family finances, and Elena had spotted it instantly. "It was a political maneuver to secure trade routes through the Tuscan coast," Marco lied, adopting a haughty tone. "Highly sensitive. It's above the common accounting. My father dealt with it personally." Elena looked up, her green eyes sharp and penetrating. "You lie beautifully, Marco, and I appreciate the effort. But my father's family has never been interested in Tuscan coastal trade. That transfer has the hallmarks of a political bribe or a massive debt settlement." She pushed the ledger back. "Keep your secrets, Marco. But know this, I am your partner. If you withhold vital information, you jeopardize my financial standing. We will maintain the illusion of fidelity for the public, but in private, I require complete transparency. The next time you lie, I will go directly to my father with my concerns." Marco rose, feeling utterly defeated. He was playing 2 simultaneous games of chess, one against Barozzi, who wanted to expose him for illegitimacy, and one against Elena, who wanted to expose him for inefficiency. Both were circling the secret room in the basement. The Gilded Cage. That evening, a messenger arrived with an invitation from Lorenzo Visconti. The Florentine had learned of the Cantarini-Foscari betrothal and offered a grand banquet to celebrate the newly announced alliance. Marco knew he couldn't refuse. A high-profile appearance with Elena was necessary to solidify the alliance against Barozzi's claims of illegitimacy. But the night before the dinner, Marco stood before his mirror, despair settling in. He couldn't face the world as Marco and a future husband. He was tired of the heavy robes, the low voice, the stiff, false posture. He unbound the linen from his head, letting his long, thick hair cascade down his shoulders. He stripped off the velvet suit and pulled on a simple, comforting dressing gown. Silas entered quietly. "The senator's physician has sent word, signore. Your father is showing signs of recovery, slow but certain. He is sleeping more soundly." Marco turned to Silas, hope and despair warring on her face. "It's too late, Silas. The betrothal is signed. Barozzi is the supervisor. Even if father recovers tomorrow, I am bound to Elena Foscari." Silas walked to the window, looking out over the moonlit Grand Canal. "Perhaps, signore, the only way out of this cage is not through politics, but through a deeper game of commerce. Barozzi seeks to control. Elena seeks to dominate. You must find the weakness in both their positions." "And where is that weakness?" Marco asked bitterly. "Barozzi's hunger for social power," Silas mused, "and Elena's absolute focus on financial power. Neither of them considers the human element." "You are forgetting, signore," Silas said, turning to look at Isabella. "You are still a Cantarini. You know what they fear." The night of Lorenzo Visconti's banquet arrived shimmering with false gaiety and ruthless ambition. It was held in a rented palazzo on the Giudecca, overlooking the main city, designed to showcase Florentine wealth in contrast to Venetian old money. Marco, accompanied by a coolly magnificent Elena Foscari, entered the ballroom. Elena was dressed in severe emerald silks that spoke of family fortunes rather than frivolous fashion. Marco was trapped in the heavy, warm black velvet suit, feeling the constraint of the linen binding his chest. Visconti was waiting, greeting them with an almost predatory grace. "The power couple of Venice. Marco, you look suitably solemn for a man about to marry into the most meticulous family in the Republic. Elena, you are, as always, radiant." Elena offered a polite, chilly acknowledgement, gripping Marco's arm tightly, a gesture of ownership for the crowd. "Thank you, Ser Visconti. We are here to celebrate commerce, not courtship." Scrutiny and shadows. The evening was a minefield. Marco spent the first hour defending his betrothal from the subtle, probing inquiries of other merchants and noblemen. Elena handled the serious political inquiries, leaving Marco free to navigate the dance floor, where he could not risk the feminine grace he had suppressed for months. Barozzi, the Cantarini supervisor, was also present, watching Marco like a hawk. "Tell me, Marco," Barozzi purred, cornering him near a large silver candelabra. "Now that you have the Foscari gold to manage, will you be more forthcoming with the records? The truth, boy, is that the Cantarini house is a sieve. Money leaks everywhere." "The records you receive are perfectly accurate, Ser Barozzi. Perhaps you should spend less time auditing my finances and more time addressing the whispers about your own recent acquisitions." Barozzi's smile vanished. Marco knew the whispers. Barozzi's recent sudden surge of wealth, which allowed him to build a fleet capable of challenging Cantarini, was too rapid to be entirely legitimate. Visconti, seeing the tension, smoothly cut in. Ser Barozzi, I hear congratulations are due. You have recently acquired an impressive volume of Eastern silver. From the Sultan's mines, I presume? A profitable venture, no doubt? Barozzi's face was unreadable. It was a modest acquisition, Ser Visconti. Diversification, as they say. Visconti merely smiled, but the interaction sparked a thought in Marco's mind. Eastern silver, the true secret. Later, while Elena was in deep discussion with an official about the city's tariffs, Marco found himself alone with Lorenzo Visconti, sharing a glass of expensive Cypriot wine. You play a dangerous game, Marco, Visconti murmured as his eyes scanned the room. Barozzi has a knife out for you, and Elena Foscari will bleed you dry for her father's bank. And you, Ser Visconti, you offer friendship and partnership. What is your knife? Marco challenged.
He is financing a major portion of his new fleet, the Silver Lion and its companionships, with Ottoman gold, Visconti continued, watching Marco closely. The Sultan wants a merchant fleet loyal to him, operating under the Venetian banner. Barozzi is that man. If this is true, Visconti, Marco said, struggling to keep his voice level, why not take this information to the council yourself? Visconti laughed, a low, cynical sound. And have the council declare me a traitor for having such intelligence? No. I need proof that can be presented without implicating me. The proof lies in the manifest of Barozzi's lead ship, the Silver Lion. That ship is not carrying spice. It's carrying Ottoman military hardware disguised as ballast, and it's due to sail next week to the Levant. Visconti leaned in one last time, his gaze intense. Barozzi's vulnerability is his ship, Marco. He uses a forged manifest, but the real cargo list is locked in his private villa near the Grand Canal. Marco finally saw the path to victory. Barozzi's obsession with Contarini's ledgers and legitimacy was a diversion. The massive threat to the Contarini house was built on Barozzi's own far greater crime. The desperate plan. Marco returned to the Contarini palazzo, the image of Barozzi's smug face burning in his mind. He awoke his father.